Good evening, paranormal community, and thank you for joining us for another amazing episode of the Odyssey Files. I am your host, Michael O'Neill. With me, barely, is my co-host, Mr. David Soyering. Good evening, Dave.
You see what I did there, right? I pulled the thing out of my ear ahead of time.
That's because you've been with me for 305 episodes before this.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm not quite myself. I'm here physically, and I'm here about 75% mentally. So I'm dealing with a migraine that I just can't shake. So anyway, it's good to be here, though. I'm excited for tonight's show. I wasn't going to miss it. Migraine.
No.
So
I thank you for that, because like I said, I was not looking forward to trying to do 2-hour interview, despite how amazing our guest is by myself. I did not have that confidence.
No, yet. I wasn't going to miss it.
And I do apologize for the late start.
I was going to say, I was thinking to myself, here we go, because all the stuff we're talking about prior, I'm like, here we go.
I went, no, it was a difficulty, but mentally, I went to start the show and realized I hadn't even uploaded the opening, the opening video yet.
Gotcha.
So the whole time I'm just like, you had one job, and you couldn't do it. So I apologize for that, but we're here, we're happy. And I want to introduce our guest here tonight. One of the very first paranormal podcasters out there, called Paranormal Podcast, and best-selling author of the True Ghost Story series, and the host of Jim Harold's Campfire. So let's welcome to the show, Mr. Jim Harold.
Hey guys, glad to be here. And Michael and David, I hope you feel better. I hope I don't make your headache worse.
No,
but thank you for showing up. It's one of those things. And guys, I appreciate it so much. You welcoming me in, if I could speak, to talk to your audience and chat with you guys about spooky stuff and spooky stories and all that good stuff. So really a pleasure to be here, and thanks so much.
Oh, absolutely. I was overjoyed when I got the email asking if we would like to have you on. Yeah. Like it was
of the podcast.
It was like the Ace Ventura line, where it's like, let me think. Sure. But I want to get absolutely, and thank you for wanting to come on to talk about volume 6 of your True Ghost Stories series. And I'd like to start there and kind of at the beginning. Since you've been in this field, even as like a podcast host with the Paranormal Podcast since 2005, what got you into the paranormal originally, and how did that kind of proceed into starting the podcast and then wanting to start the book series?
Like so many people in my age group, I blame Leonard Nimoy.
You should.
And In Search Of. When I was very young, though, very young. I was in elementary school, and every Sunday night, and I'm in Cleveland, Channel 5, appointment viewing, 7:00 every Sunday night, In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy. And it scared the bejesus out of me. But it kind of opened up a lifelong fascination with the paranormal. And after that, I devour any books that I could find, books on things like the Bermuda Triangle or Amityville, or, those Time Life books, the ones I'm talking about, those books in the area of the library or bookstore that had the books for paranormal was too small every time. And then in 2005, I had gone to school for broadcasting, more actually for TV than for radio. Ended up working in radio and advertising, and did that for the better part of 13 years. In 2005, I look up, I've got a wife who I still have, same wife, 2 kids, same 2 kids, a lot bigger now. But I'm like, I can't, I love the idea of broadcasting, but it wasn't like I could pack up and go to Paducah and start all over again in my 30s. So I heard about this thing called podcasting. enjoyed listening to some of them. People like Adam Curry, Leo Laporte, and some of the kind of home-rolled ones. I thought, you know what? Just for fun, I'm going to do a podcast on the paranormal, just for fun. Nobody will listen. I'll call it the Paranormal Podcast because there weren't that many at the time. And I'll be damned if it didn't kind of take off. And in 2012, I asked my very nice wife if I could quit my day job and start doing it full time. And I've been doing it full time ever since. So I feel very blessed. I love the subject. That little kid is still in there who's interested in this stuff legitimately. It's not just a job. It's much more. And I'm fascinated by the topics and love to talk about them.
Have you been like out in the field? Do you go out in the field and like investigate places yourself, or go in pursuit of UFO sites or Bigfoot sightings or other cryptid sightings? Or are you more kind of just enjoy talking about it and then having people come to you with their experiences?
It's definitely the latter. I mean, I'm like, I'm safely behind my mic where no ghosts can get to me. But no, I don't. You know what? There's two reasons for that. One is, first of all, I don't think that's my forte. I think I'm a lot better behind the mic and doing this than I would be at that. There's people who's really good at that. And I don't think that I could, there's people who do both, like Dave Schrader, and there's other people who do that, and I respect that. But for me, I like this. It's kind of like, I'll give you a comparison. Like sports broadcasting, right? I'm a big NFL fan. I'm a big, even though I live in Cleveland. I don't know. But anyway, I'm a big NFL fan. So there's announcers who played the game, and then they're announcers, and they're very good, and they bring great insights, and they bring insights that the straight broadcasters don't have. But then I also like the traditional broadcaster, never really played the game, but they have kind of a different perspective. They've got, it's kind of an arm's length. I'm saying they can be objective maybe in a way that someone who played the game really can't. I think there's room for both. Mm-hmm. For me, I've decided to be like that lifetime broadcaster who never played football. It's like, now that doesn't mean if I go to an event and they have a little investigation, I won't go on it and participate. As far as me getting out and doing serious investigation, I don't see that in the cards. And it's not just laziness. Maybe that's part of it, but it really is a decision to kind of keep that distance.
Makes total sense.
It does, because one of the when I interview new investigators and stuff like that, right, and one of the things that I have to tell them is the risks involved in what we do. And a lot of people, when they have families like you do, immediately they're like, I got kids at home, I can't be taking that risk of bringing something home with me, or something bad happened to me, while on one of these investigations. I got to keep them safe along with myself.
Right.
So I mean, I agree that there's a place for the play-by-play, and then there's a place for the analysis. And right. So no, I think that's amazing, especially since you're right. You can have that kind of different perspective as opposed to being jaded and having your experiences dictate how you respond to certain things. Dave can back me up on this, that there are times I will go off my rocker on certain things because of my own experiences,
right,
and stuff like that. But I mean, were you surprised, and I guess to what degree, when it did take off, your show?
Completely surprised. And I was working in my job when this really started to solidify was I worked for a large radio group, a 3-letter network that you would recognize. And I was kind of like in charge of getting their whole 4 stations selling internet advertising. So my job was to encourage the salespeople to sell it and go out with them. But it was before really smartphones and streaming audio really got into effect. And I was beating my head against the wall because it was almost an impossible job, because people didn't even realize they could stream music or stream the radio on their computer, or smartphones were just coming in. So it was a very tough job. And I'm kind of beating my head against the wall. Although I enjoy the people I work with, I learned a lot there and had a pretty good tenure with them. But on the other hand, I was doing these podcasts. I wasn't doing them every week, and I'd let a few weeks go, and then I'd do one, and people kept saying, "Give me more content, give me more content, give me more content." And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm beating my head against the wall over here. Over here, people are saying, we want more. And I told my wife, I'm going to get super dedicated to this, and I'm going to give it 6 months where I'm like, every week I put out a show. I'm religious. And right in that 6 months, I got like a solicitation from an ad agency saying, "Hey, would you want to would you be interested in Audible sponsoring your show?" And it's kind of like what you said. Yeah. But that to me was, and I do believe in these things, I think it was a sign from the universe. This is what you're supposed to do. Mm-hmm. And then once that happened, I'm like, this is what I'm supposed to do. And been doing it ever since.
Do you still do weekly?
Oh, yeah. I have the Paranormal podcast every week. I have Jim Harold's Campfire every week. And then I have 8 episodes of Plus Club content that go out every month. So on average, and we're looking at restarting some older shows I used to do. So right now, the count, what is that? 8, my math is not good. 16 episodes a month right now of everything I do. And there's going to be some additions to that as well.
Nice.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a full-time job.
So let me ask you this, because Dave and I are now coming to that head. You heard me earlier saying, this is episode 306.
Right.
That we've done in the last 7 years. And now we're starting to get to the point where it's like, what do we talk about that hasn't been talked about yet? How do we find new topics? You've been doing this for 20 years. Do you find that you have to revisit topics, or are you continually still finding new ones to do?
For example, Paranormal podcast, we've covered most of the big topics, but I mean, you could do a show about UFOs for 30 years and not every week and not hit everything. True. And with ghosts and with any of this, there's different viewpoints. Just recently there was a study out, I think from some Harvard researchers, talking about the idea of crypto-terrestrials and ultra-terrestrials. The idea that, yeah, there might be non-human intelligences and they might live beneath the earth or beneath the oceans. So there's, and that's not necessarily new. That goes back to the work of somebody like Mac Tanis. But the point is, there's always a different take on it. And to be honest with you, even on Campfire, you would think I do a 90-minute show every week of listener stories. And we pretty much do a new show every week, maybe 4th or 5th week, maybe 6th week or 8th week. We'll throw in a best of one topic, but they're almost all new shows. And I still get people who give me stories of things I've never heard of before or a different kind of spin on it. So there's always something new. I never feel bored. I never feel like there's a lack of topics. I always think it's endless. And the more you talk about it, the more possibilities come up. So I think it's an endless topic, and I could do these shows until I'm on the other side and still not hit all the possible notes.
Yeah, that's very true. Crap, I had my response to that. Now I lost it.
Oh, I've done that plenty of times, so don't worry about it. That's goes with the territory.
Yes, it does.
I've been there. Well, that's very fascinating. That's an interesting, you try to figure out a vamp line or two while you figure out, what was I thinking? I've done that a million times.
I'm glad that you're encountering stuff that you've
oh yeah,
so many times.
You'll have a question in mind, but then you'll start, you should really listen to the person. You listen to the person, you're like, that's interesting, and you forget your original question. Oh, this happens all the time.
It really does.
To me, it does, at least.
Yeah.
Oh no, you're in good company.
Yeah.
Especially with me, that's for sure. I think I've created at least 24 new words out of thin
Oh
air.
yeah.
Oh yeah, he's good. He's good
Oh,
at.
I've got one for one of my plus shows. It's the cryptid report. So we do interviews with people about cryptids. And in the opening, I say chupacabra. But my daughters, who also have now gotten to the age where they actually help with the editing of some of the shows, they make fun of the way I said chupacabra. And it's like chupacabra because I kind of swallowed the word. So now it's like they've been bugging me for like the last 10 years about it. And I'm like, maybe I should recut that at some point because they concentrate chupacabra. So believe me, if you talk into a mic long enough, you're going to pretty much make yourself sound like an idiot eventually. At least me. There's some people who are so letter perfect. I am not one of those people.
I think people who are letter perfect give off a sense of like being non-genuine.
Right.
Like we make mistakes. That's just
right.
who we are as human race. Right. So I think I remembered what so you do 90 minutes of listener stories a week.
Yeah.
How do you do that? Because I mean
very careful.
Like, so I mean as I guess as somebody, because Dave and I do pretty much the same thing for the first hour of our show, unless we have a guest like you who's willing to come on for the full thing. We call it the mailbag. But when you do these stories, do you just read them or do you like respond to them as what it could be an answer to like a question that they ask?
Oh no, the person comes on and tells the story. So I would say, Michael, you tell me that you saw a shadow person. Tell us all about it. And then you tell the story. That's how I do
it. Dave, put that on the docket.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking I've got about a half a dozen stories that'll blow Jim away of my own personal experiences too. So
JimHarold.com/campfire. Sign up.
I was going to say, the story at the hospital would definitely is a story you have not heard before.
Well, that's the thing. There are always stories. You know, I think, I've heard it all. Here comes another visitation story. And then there'll be a total left turn.
Oh, no. Yeah. This story is, I've never heard it before. If I hadn't experienced it myself, I'd be very difficult. I don't know. I believe everything. I shouldn't say that because I believe everything until you give me a reason not to believe it. So I am completely open to every single aspect of every single possibility until I can definitively say for however I can say it, whether it's through knowledge or whether it's through experience, until I have a reason not to believe it. So,
well, I'll tell you, you reminded me of a story. If you don't mind, I'd like to tell it because it's one of my all-time favorite. It's not in this book, but it's one of my all-time favorite campfire stories. And it has to do with a hospital. And it's kind of indicative because this book, it's called True Ghost Stories. But the truth is it's True Ghost Stories and more because a lot of this stuff is out of left field. You would not expect it on a spooky story show, but we get them. Well, this is a great one, and it will be in a future book. But this woman, actually, I was from Ohio, my home state. And basically what happened was she's like I think a respiratory therapist or something at a hospital, major hospital in major metro area. And the one day she was going with a patient, she had somebody from transport who was actually pushing the bed, and she was going with this person to do some kind of test. So they go in the big freight elevator, you know, where they put the hospital beds in. And she's there with the transport guy and the patient in the bed. And she looks across, and there's a passenger elevator across the way. And she sees a group of people get into it. And the one woman looks really familiar to her, and she can't put her finger on it. She's turned away from her. The woman turns around, and the woman is her. And the woman is looking directly at her, and she's looking back. And she's like, oh my God, what is this? The doors close. You know, she has to work. She can't just stop working. She does whatever she has to do with the patient, comes back, and works the whole day. The whole day it's bugging her. What in the world's going on? So anyway, the end of the day, she's exhausted. It's been a long day. She's, had this weird experience that's been running through her mind she can't figure out. So she's standing at the passenger elevator and she's standing with a group of people, and she walks into the elevator. She's like, man, what a day. And she looks up and she sees the elevator across the way. It's like that freight big elevator that I was talking about earlier. And there's a hospital bed with a patient. There's a person from transport, and there's a young woman who is accompanying them. And that young woman is her. The doors close. She goes home. Now, again, some people would say, that's BS. Okay, here's what I think. Okay, I'm a successful mid-tier podcaster. Nobody's going to confuse me for Joe Rogan, okay? It's not like I have a nice listenership, but I don't have millions of people listening. There's really no benefit to her whatsoever to come up on my show and make something so elaborate up. And she seemed very credible, very well-spoken, very sincere. So there's two possibilities. Either she's making it up, which I don't know why she would. What's the benefit to her? Or she experienced something that at least now, through our current understanding, we would call paranormal. And I think that's exactly what happened. I don't know if it's a time loop. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's, something to do with the multiverse. I don't know, but I believe it happened. So those are the kind of out there stories sometimes we get on Campfire.
I like that story.
I do too. In fact, the stories that Dave and I were talking about before the show, before you joined us, the ones that we wanted to talk to you about, really don't have nothing to do with the supernatural. But it's those other stories of dealing with like multiverses and dealing with like government cover-ups and stuff like that really caught our attention. And I guess since we brought that up, let's get into the books and the stories.
Okay, sure.
So, I mean, just to start, like, do you have any sort of, I don't want to say preferences, but I mean, like, what has to be in a story in order for it to make the book?
It has to be compelling. And there has to be, I'm a big Twilight Zone guy, so I love stories that have a twist. I love stories that maybe don't quite end the way you think they're going to end. But I think in this, you can't pick up through the book because I can pick it up through the tone of voice and so forth. But a lot of it's got to do with the sincerity of the original storyteller, how clear they are with their stories. Honestly, I tend to gravitate towards people's stories where they say, well, nothing ever happens to me, but there was this one time. And then they tell you about that one time. I have a bias for those kind of stories too. And just a compelling story. So to me, the paranormal is a continuum, right? I mean, I know some people are like, everything's a demon. It's all demons. And then that's on one side. And on the other side, you've got my new age friends. And I've interviewed many of those I have a metaphysical kind of podcast for my Plus Club where I've done 400 episodes of that one alone. And that one's all like, getting in touch with your chakras and all that stuff. And which I also think is interesting. All that stuff's interesting. But the point is that those folks a lot of times say, oh, there is no evil. There's just a lower vibration. And I kind of think, with all due respect, John Wayne Gacy, Timothy Dahmer, Adolf Hitler, there's evil. So what I'm saying is I think that the paranormal is a continuum. So I say it's just like everyday life: good, bad, happy, sad. And there's some really frightening, terrifying things. And I believe those exist. And I believe there are darker energies. I believe evil is real. I believe some things are just weird and kind of in the middle. They're not good or bad. They're just weird. And then there's stuff that's really very heartwarming and very poignant. And I kind of want to spotlight all of it because I think that's the best reflection of reality.
I will admit that there's at least one story. I was saying that, like, because we do the mailbag as well, that I'm probably pretty numb to like supernatural
Mhm.
type stories, but there was one which was the paranormal polka.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
where the lady's grandmother had passed away, and then they went down to Florida, for her birthday, and all of a
Yeah.
sudden that was playing in a Mexican restaurant. Like, that actually almost brought tears to my eyes, because that's just something that I would love to experience myself,
Right.
with my past loved one. So I absolutely loved that one. That one was a very heartwarming one.
Yeah, that was,
Um,
as you said, the girl, her grandma, she's very close to her grandma, and her grandma came from Europe, and she loved polkas, and she would always play the beer barrel polka. That was her favorite polka, and I'm pretty familiar with polka, coming from Cleveland, which was one of the big polka centers in the U.S. But anyway, so like you said, they were down in Florida, and they were at a Mexican restaurant.
mhm.
Now, Mexican restaurants, they could play some maybe accordion music and stuff, but they're not going to play a European-based polka. But they did. They came out and they brought her cake, her birthday cake, because they set it up for, and they started playing they started playing the beer barrel polka, which Jill was her name, I think. She took it as a sign from her grandma. And I actually have a personal story, real quick. I'll give you. And it's not, again, not a traditional paranormal story, but I think that it's paranormal. In 2017, I was asked to be a speaker on a paranormal cruise, which was pretty cool. I enjoyed it. So, but anyway, I had lost an uncle of mine in 2013 who I was very close to. He's like a second dad to me. And he actually lived with us. So, I mean, I saw him every day. He was like my second dad. So anyway, that kind of sets up the story. So this is 2017. I was due to speak that day because it was at Sea Day, but I had a little bit of a sore throat. So I thought, on the break, I said, I'm going to go get a coffee real quick at the cafe, there on the cruise, so I can warm up my throat a little bit. So when I talk, I won't sound like a frog any more than usual. So anyway, I had to walk through the ship's casino to do that. And I passed this crane machine. It's like a claw that comes down and grabs piles of cash. And, your chances of winning, not too good. But anyway, the funny thing is that my uncle, who I lost, loved those games. Not in that context, but like at stores, they would have stuffed toys. Mm-hmm. And he would go and he would stop and he would drop $10 to try to win a stupid stuffed toy, and then he would give it to a neighbor kid or somebody when they came by. He just loved the sport of that, and he liked low stakes gambling too. He loved to play the lotto, $20 football pool, that kind of stuff. I'm like, he would have been in his glory here because he could have played the crane game ostensibly for cash. He would love this. I wish he were here. And one of the attendees were playing this crane game. And that's kind of where I think got my attention, was it was one of our attendees was playing it, one of our group. So anyway, no longer sooner than I had that thought, I wish he were here, some woman walks up next to the machine. She cups her hands to her mouth and she goes, John. My uncle's name was John. And guy comes over, I don't know, must have been her husband or one of her group or something, and they were reunited, and that was the end of the story. But to me, I think sometimes those who have passed have the ability to move things like on a chessboard to get a message to us. I think my uncle's message, the way I interpreted it, was I had a loving thought of him and was thinking of him intensely, and he was basically saying right back at you. That's the way I took it. Now, skeptic could say, just a big coincidence, Jim. You're kidding yourself. Just a big coincidence. I mean, the guy could have been Steve, Bruce, Jim, Bill, any name, David or Michael. But he wasn't. He was John. So I just think it's, I often say on the show, too much of a coincidence to be a coincidence.
That's a t-shirt right there. It's too much of a coincidence to be a coincidence.
If there's anything that Dave has spent a great number of years drilling into my head, it's that there is no such thing as coincidences.
Yeah.
that everything is part of the plan, and sometimes it works for you in that way, and other times not so much.
Right. I agree.
Still part of the path. I mean, not every day is going to be the nice, beautiful sugar
Right.
white sand that you're walking on.
And I try to get that. I try to tell that to my kids. Life is in many ways a roller coaster, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And we are going to have those high hills, and we're all going to have those valleys. And you just got to try to, when things are tough, remember the good times and wait for the next good time. And
just enjoy it.
Yeah,
make the most of it.
Have there ever? It's kind of a two-part question. Have there ever been stories that after they tell you, whether you're recording them for the video show or whether you're thinking of putting them in the book, where you're just like, world's not ready for that yet, or a story that maybe they come on and you don't believe it, like you think they are making it up?
That's very rarely do I think people are making it up. There have been a few times, like one time I'm sure somebody was using a Howard Stern catchphrase, and it's like, I listen to Howard, I know the catchphrases, but I just recorded it and said thank you very much and just never put it on the show. But and then there was another one, because we kind of encourage people, try not to read your story. If you want to make a couple notes and bullet points just so you don't forget anything, that's fine. But don't read, because most people, honestly, when they read, they sound like they're reading. Oh, yeah. So this woman, she just went into reading it. And then, and I had told her this before. And then I was trying to ask her a question. She was just reading and would not listen to me. And then all of a sudden she finishes that story and she's like, hey, do you have my other book over there? And and she proceeded to read me another 10-minute story of, I don't even know if these were like books that she purchased. And at the end I said, well, thank you for sharing your story. And that never saw the light of day. But that is I got to tell you, that is the very, I mean, there's been a number of, we probably use well over 95% of our stories. Now, I do think sometimes, I think if I had one thing I would say, I would think that maybe sometimes people want something to be supernatural and maybe it's not. But my goal on the show is just like, it's kind of what David was saying before. I believe you until you give me a reason not to believe you. And my job on the show is not to do a mic, I'm dating myself a little bit saying this, but I'm not here to Mike Wallace you. I'm not here to say, well, my thing is that I want to give you, and I don't particularly like this phrase, but I want to give you a safe space. I want to give you a place where you feel like you can tell your story. You're not going to be judged, and you're going to have a friendly ear, and you just share with us what happened. And then people can decide for themselves what they think about it one way or the other. But I mean, even it extends to, we have a Campfire group, Jim Harold's virtual Campfire. We have over 26,000 members there. And we have a couple of admins, but very rarely do we have to take anything down. People are very respectful. I think in a way it's self-selecting. I think people sense that I want to be welcoming, and there is a bit of a sign-up process. It's not just call in. I think it would be tougher if it were just, here's a phone number, call in. That would obviously be tougher. But I think people just get it, and they want to be a part of it. And I'm very thankful for that.
That was one of the questions I was going to ask you was, do you ever see like some of your stories creating like a huge blowback from your listener base, like in a negative way? And I'm glad to hear that doesn't happen.
I can't even remember when I've had negative. There was a story, and it's funny, it just popped up on my Facebook, where a woman wanted a sign from her dad, and literally she was watching a television show and they flashed up, they were illustrating a story, and they literally somehow flashed up a picture of her dad, and she doesn't know how they got it. So, and I posted on Facebook a photo of him that she provided and the photo from the TV, because she grabbed her phone real quick and took a picture. And there were most people were very supportive, and some people, and then they started to argue. And I said, look, if you argue, and it was just a couple of people, and I said, if you argue, you will be banned from this Facebook group, because that's not what we're about. We can say, well, I'm not sure about that or things, but we always have to be respectful, and we always have to be kind with one another. If you want to argue, there are a lot of places on the internet to go argue. You'll have no shortage of finding places to argue. This is not it. And we just have kind of a zero tolerance policy. And so far we've not had any problems. And really people have been so nice. I mean, that's what I would say. They've just been so nice to me.
Good.
Yeah. And I applaud you for the fact that you're strict on that, because a lot of people, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And
True.
if you let them two people start to argue, all of a sudden you have 15 people.
Right.
Like, oh, well, they're getting away with it. I don't agree with this. This time I throw in my 5 cents
right.
or
and
whatever.
The thing is, if you hear a story and you don't buy it, that's okay. I don't need to know that. I mean, and I think I don't want to, because I don't do politics, but I think, and this goes across with everything, I think people all of a sudden feel that, they have to get in the middle of an argument and they have to argue. And I'm kind of like, well, there's plenty of things I see I disagree with. And it's just like, okay, you think the way you think, you go ahead and think that. Good for you.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the greatest stories that Dave and I have done, like, we don't agree on what could possibly be going on in that. And we pretty much are like, here's my opinion. And he states his opinion, on to the next.
That's right. That's right. And sometimes you agree to disagree. And I think that's something that's been totally lost these days.
Yeah. No, we do that too. Yeah.
Yes, we do. So the one thing that I guess I didn't even notice this, in a world, in a society where, as you said earlier, everything is a demon. Dave and I make fun of that like every week. We have to,
right.
And how it's so rare. But for a society that believes, because of TV and movies and stuff like that, that everything is evil, no matter what, knocks on a wall, if it's 3, oh my God, it's a demon.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that in your book, there's none of that. Is that on purpose, or do those stories just kind of not? I mean, obviously there's the Ouija board where Dave and I were talking about that, where the parents like couldn't figure out what was going on with the girl Janice,
right?
That you added in there. But I mean, like, that was it for everything that I had read. Now, is that on purpose?
No. What we do, the selection process, is we take about a 2-year period, and I've done a book for several years. And by the way, these books can be read in any order, and it's 65 separate stories, so you can pick up anywhere. I mean, it might be kind of disgusting, but it's a great bathroom book. But but the whatever you do in the bathroom, but it's just basically, I take about a year and a half, 2 years, and I say, okay. And I work with my assistant producer and my wife, who was kind of my editor on this book. And we come up with, okay, what do we think the best 65 stories are? And these were the ones. If we'd had more demon stories in this period, I would have used more demon stories if they were the best ones. And I can think of a couple off the top of my head from other time periods that would go to that level, but we just didn't have that many in that couple of years. So we kind of try to do them chronologically. I mean, there was one about a Ouija board and the devil. That's the first story in the book. And there are some spooky things, but yeah, it's not everything's a demon, man. And again, I kind of one of those people who believe the devil's real. I mean, I believe that evil is real. You can call it the devil, you can call it whatever you want. I took a low level, I took an easy math class in college, and it was obvious the professor thought we were all idiots. I only took it because I was in communication, so why am I going to sweat? So he's like, X squared. He's like, X can be anything. X can be horsey. Horsey. So you can call demon whatever you want. You could call him horsey, but I believe that demons are real. I believe that evil is real, but not everything falls into that category. And I would say not even the majority fall into that category.
No, we talk about it a lot, that it's rare.
I think it's a lot of marketing. Now exorcism, I mean, for example, the Catholic Church has, people who do exorcisms all the time. I mean, I believe that stuff is real, but is it the majority? I don't believe it's the majority.
No.
Yeah.
I just have to point this out because I just love the fact that Mike displayed his use of the English language again. It's Janice, Mike, not Janice.
Tomato, Dave.
I just wanted to point that out because I'm like, Janice. I'm like, where the hell did he see that name? I read the book. I didn't see the name Janice, and I don't remember that. So I just scrolled back down there to look at it to see. I couldn't help it.
Whatever. Tomato, Dave. Move on with life.
So, all right, I got a favorite story I want to bring up here. One of the ones that I really liked out of the book was the last ride to Clarksville. I think that is an absolutely intriguing as hell story of, like, they know that it's 11 miles and they're doing 85 miles an hour. They know they should be there in 10 minutes or less.
Yeah.
And the whole CD plays out. And they're looking at each other like, what the hell is going on here?
And actually that title was a kind of wink at the old song, The Last Train to Clarksville. Yeah. So, what happened was these young guys went to this music festival and they ran out of supplies, right?
Yep.
So they get in a friend's truck. He's going like 85 miles an hour. And it's 11 miles to the next town, Clarksville, where there's the big box store that everybody knows. And they keep going and they keep going and they keep going and they put on a CD and the CD is like 40 minutes and it runs out and they keep going. The gas gauge doesn't move. I don't think the clock moved. I mean, it was just like really weird.
Yeah.
So anyway, they finally get there and it's all like these big guys and they're shaking and they're freaking out. They go in the store and they're asking, and I believe what they said, it was like rolling countryside. On the way in, everything was like rolling farmland and countryside. They even argued over going into one of the farmhouses to see if they could get directions. And our caller said, absolutely not. No way. That is like every horror movie I've ever seen. I'm not going into any farmhouses. So anyway, they go get their stuff and they're asking the employee, and they're doing this separately. They're asking employees, is there any other way over to this music festival? Is there any, like, could we have gotten on a bad road or gotten on the wrong road? They said, no, there's one way in, one way out, period. And the funny thing was they went back and it went just as smoothly as could be. It was 11 miles. It took the time it was supposed to take. The topography of the land was totally different. Mm-hmm. It was like mountainous. And they got there and they still don't know what happened. And they said at first they were kind of quiet about it, but now they don't care because they know what happened.
Yeah, I find that story to be extremely interesting.
Mm-hmm. That's like, a good one.
What did they end up in? And I was telling Mike before the show started, I'm like, could you just see if they would have turned off the road and gone to one of these farmhouses that looked abandoned?
Yeah.
And then somehow accidentally got caught in whatever weird dimensional loop or whatever you want to call it, right? A slice of the onion that shouldn't have been there was there.
Right.
And so what would have happened if they'd have gotten out and went into that house? Would they have gotten stuck there and became part of that moment in time and disappeared? Right? People disappear all the time.
Yeah. It's so funny you mention that because there's a story that's not in this book, but it's my all-time favorite if you want me to tell you. Sure. And it's kind of long. The storyteller said exactly what you said, David, about getting stuck. This is called the Roadhouse Saloon. And this really is something out of the Twilight Zone, but I really, really, really believe the storyteller, and I'll explain why in a minute. So anyway, her name's T.I. She would spend every summer up at a camp. This is a grown-up campground, and up in Wisconsin. And this one summer she was there, and her and one of her friends at the campground, Bob, went to see a band about an hour away at a bar. So they go to the bar, They stay till closing time. They actually stay a little later and talk to the band afterwards because they're both musicians. So anyway, they're headed back. It's about an hour to the camp. It's rural, and anybody that's been in rural areas, it's not like city nighttime. It's like country nighttime. No city lights, no, it is dark. Right. So they're on this 2-lane road, you can imagine it. And about 10 minutes in, TA says, "Oh, I've really got to go to the bathroom." And Bob says, "Well, pull up a tree because there's not much here." And she said, "No, just drive fast." So they go a few more minutes and they see this bar. And it's like the joint is jumping. There's like a thump, thump, thump music and the lights are on and there's cars. And like, that makes no sense. It's past like legal closing time. And they said, "Well, it's open. Let's go." So they go in. T.I. goes to the restroom. Bob gets him probably a couple of soft drinks or something from the bar. They're sitting at the table talking. And Bob says, "I'm really glad we came here because they've got this Old West mural on this whole one side of the wall. And I've heard about this before. But I never got to see it." So they look at it and they're talking and they notice that the people in the place are kind of spaced out. They're kind of like this, but they don't think anything of it. They look at the mural a little bit more. And if anybody's ever listened to my show, they've heard this story because I've told it like 100 times. And they notice that people in the actual bar are also in the painting. So like there's a woman standing by the bar and she's in the painting dressed up as like what they, not politically correct, but what they call a dance hall girl. There's some guys playing pool in the real bar over here. They're in the painting playing cards. So they thought that was kind of weird, but then they said, "You know what? We got it. The person who did this, these are regulars. This is just like a tribute. It's like an homage to the original folks, to the folks who go there." So then it gets weirder. There's this old Wurlitzer bubbler style jukebox with vinyl in it, which at the time was uncommon because vinyl was in its uncool phase. Now it's back in its cool phase. But anyway, there was this guy there and he puts on Chubby Checker's "Let's Twist Again." And that'll come into play later in the story. So he comes up to T.I. and he smiles and he has a mouthful of rotten teeth. And he asks T.I., "Would you like to dance?" And T.I. says, No, I don't dance. She held up a cane. She uses a cane. And she said she was really glad to have that cane to get out of that dance. So anyway, they keep talking and they're in this bizarre place. But again, they're thankful she got to use the restroom and they're going to wrap up in a little bit. And they notice something they didn't notice before. In the painting, there were these double doors, like in the Westerns where the guy would come through the swing doors and said, "I won't see the sheriff," that kind of thing. Well, they noticed something in the door other than just the doors. They noticed two misty kind of columns. And they turned away. They talked a little more, and it was almost developing in like an old school Polaroid picture. And it was developed a little more, and one was shorter, and one was quite a bit taller. And then they talked a little bit more, and then noticed it was a man and a woman. And thought, wow, this is weird. And it got weirder because they noticed the woman had curly hair, and T.I. had curly hair. Then they noticed the woman had cowboy boots, and T.I. had cowboy boots. And then they noticed that the woman had a cane. And that was enough until they realized it's T.I. and Bob in the doorway. They decide, we are going to get out of here. Mm-hmm. So as they're walking out, the people are kind of going like this, "Come back, come back." They don't listen smartly. They get out. The minute they close the door, the whole place goes black. Mm-hmm. Like nobody's ever been there. They turn around. There's one car in the lot. They drive away. And if that were me, I would never go back there again. But T.I. is braver than I am. So she got a friend and like a night or two later went back. 8:00. She didn't wait till 3:00 in the morning. She went in. The mural is there, but the door, the swinging doors are just swinging doors. Nobody's in them. She's not in them. Bob's not in them. Everything else is the same. She goes over to the jukebox. The difference is it's not a Wurlitzer jukebox like happened in her first experience. It's like for then a modern CD jukebox. And oh, by the way, No Chubby Checker or Let's Twist Again is to be found in the directory of songs. So she goes over and talks to the bartender. And she says, hey, and it's a young woman. She tells a young woman, hey, I was in here the other night and, the place was busy. And there was this young kind of farm boy looking strong, strapping guy as a bartender. The woman looks at her kind of funny and says, there's nobody that bartends here by that description. The only two bartenders are me and my elderly father. And then T.I. leaves. And I used to say she never came back, but she did end up going back because this place, there's a couple little like denouements to this, I guess you say. One is the place actually existed. I don't know if it's still in business, but it does or did exist. I've seen pictures of it. The excellent cryptozoology researcher Chad Lewis up in Wisconsin area has taken pictures of the mural, and it's just the way T.I. describes it. In fact, I did a YouTube video on it, and it's on my YouTube channel, Jim Harold. Also, I felt so strongly about the story, which T.I. told me back in about 2012, that I traveled up to Michigan to her home right before the pandemic in the kind of late summer, early fall of 2019, and we did a video segment on it. And I believe her more now than I believed her in 2012, because once I met her, I'm like, she is not making this up. And she comes from a very kind of respected profession. I won't get into what that is. I believe she's retired now, but very respected position, kind of pillar of her community. Totally believe her. What she experienced, I don't know. But to your point, David, she said at the end of that video something along the lines, she hates to think what would have happened had they got caught there. Would it be like in that layer of the onion, just very much like what you said?
Yeah. Well, I think that's an incredible story. And the fact that they were actually being painted into the mural.
Yeah. That's wild. That really sounds Twilight Zone-y.
Yeah, right. I mean, get up and run or become permanently part of that.
Yeah.
And then nobody knows what happened to you because you never show back up at the campground.
That's exactly what she said. She said she was afraid people would have thought she ran off with Bob. You know, they don't know what would have happened. So,
yeah, no, very interesting. That's a great story.
It's almost like the real life story of the picture of Dorian Gray's mother.
Yeah.
Type thing, where they like the painting was stealing their essence and adding it to its own.
And it was also interesting, before I mentioned that everybody in the place was in that painting. So did those people get caught? Who knows? I don't know. And that's the thing. I mean, this and that elevator story, some of them are just so weird that either they're being made up or they really indicate other dimensions or the multiverse or something. And in neither of those cases do I think they're made up. So,
no, I think you hit it right on the head. I think the reason those people were calling them back in there, hey, come on back in, it's totally okay, come on back in, is because they wanted some new blood. So to speak, right? Not blood in like a, a murder type of thing. They wanted, but
some new friends to play with.
Right, exactly. They wanted some new people in the bar because they're sick and tired of dancing with the guy with the rotted teeth. They want somebody else to dance with. They want Bob, get out there and cut a rug.
There you go.
Tired of this guy cutting a rug. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting.
Very much so. I look forward to that being. Well, even though I already know the story, but I think everybody would love that story to be one of the upcoming books.
Well, it's in book 2. I believe it's.
It's in book 2.
Yeah.
Gotcha. This kind of goes one hand in hand, but has there ever been a story, especially in this book, where after they're done telling it, or even while they're telling it, you're just kind of sitting back and you'd be like, I don't have a word. Like, I don't know. Just wow. Like you just don't have a reaction to it because it's just that fascinating and that like mind blowing.
I think the one that follows that, and this, you said something about government conspiracies, the soft serve man.
Yeah,
Did
that
you
was
read the soft
yes,
serve man?
yes.
There was that one. But
Disgusting,
Yeah.
disgusting reason it's called that too.
Yeah. And then there was the one
Didn't see
about
that
the
coming when
school,
I
the
was reading it.
strangest school day ever.
That's
Yes.
the one I was talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. Both of those would fit that category like, oh my God, what was that all about? And not that I disbelieved them. I did believe them, but just what are the implications of those stories? So which one do you want me to retell one of those to kind of give
Well,
people a feel for it?
So here's the interesting thing, right? We have a friend of ours, personal friend of ours, and a friend of the show, and she's been on TV. She was on a very popular TV show, Dana Mitchell.
Mm-hmm.
And she has the most incredible life story that is very similar to the one where
the school.
they take the kids out one by one and then take them into these tents and stuff. And she has this most absolutely amazing story. And she has an implanted memory of a number 2 pencil being jammed into her arm. And that's why she has this blue rice kernel stuck under her skin that nobody will remove. The doctors will not remove it.
Wow.
For her.
Well, she won't even bring herself to remove it. Like,
she won't bring herself
to remove
it. Right. Because
wow.
she knows that it's some sort of tracking device or some sort of implanted alien technology in her body.
Yeah.
And if you hear her story, you would 100% be right behind that and be like, you know what? You're right, Dana. That is some sort of tracking device because her mom worked for a secret part of the government that she will not disclose exactly what her title was. But her mother, when the 4-star generals walked in the room, they sat down and shut up, and her mother ran the show.
Wow.
Okay. So whoever she was incredibly powerful in Washington. It's just the whole thing is weird. Like there's this laboratory, like they built these homes and everybody who worked at this laboratory lived in these big, beautiful homes, but nobody else was allowed in the community. It's like something from a Twilight Zone thing. And then in this laboratory, they were doing gene splicing shit with creatures. And it's just, God, her life story is absolutely fantastic. You would love to have her on.
Yeah, it sounds like a great guest.
Yeah, absolutely. She is a phenomenal guest.
I mean, I don't want to be labeled a conspiracy theorist because that's the worst thing you can be called these days. But I honestly think there's stuff that goes on with the government that we don't know about. I mean, come on. And some of it's very justified. I mean, I'm a patriotic American and I believe in national security, and there's other stuff going on that maybe shouldn't be going on. And there's yet more stuff we should be told about, we're not told about. When it comes to UFOs, I personally believe there's a little bit of a turf war going on with our government. I believe that part of the government is kind of sticking to the script that we've had for the last 70 years. Nothing to see here. It's swamp gas or whatever. And then I think you have kind of an insurgent part of the government, people in government who are trying to get some of the truth out. And I think they're having a big old battle right now between those different factions. And I'll tell you, I wouldn't necessarily I would not put my money on the people for disclosure, because the people who've been covering up whatever's going on with ETs have been very successful for the last 70 years. And who's to say that they won't be successful the next 70 years? Because I remember last summer when there was that committee and you had a Republican and a Democrat agreeing that there had been a multi-year cover-up. You had Moskowitz on the Democratic side, and I could see him Burchett on the Republican side. And they were basically agreeing that there had been a multi-decade cover-up. They were saying this while sitting on a congressional committee, okay? And I was watching News Nation. It was on News Nation because I said, this is important enough. I'm going to stop what I'm doing with the podcast because this relates to the podcast and watch it. I said, let me see what CNN's saying. And CNN was telling me how bad Trump was. And then I turned it over to Fox. I'm like, well, maybe Fox will have something. And they were telling me how bad Biden was. And I'm like, wait a minute. both you guys on both sides are totally missing this. You have two Congress people saying that there has been a multi-decade cover-up on the UFO UAP, since that's a phrase now, UAP topic, and you're doing your own partisan, same old, this side's bad, that side's bad. Why isn't this on the front page of every paper in America? Why aren't they breaking into the their soap operas or whatever's on these days and saying, look, this is important. You need to see this. A Republican and a Democrat have just said that there's a cover-up. But somehow that got lost. And it's kind of like the only time there's a UFO, maybe it was a couple years ago. I forget when it was. There was a big dump of UFO information or something. Sure enough, it happened on a Friday at 2:00. Now, that anybody knows anything about the communication business and the media business, what do you do when you want to bury a story? You put it out late on a Friday because everybody's tired. I mean, it's a little bit different now with the internet age. This was definitely a standard operating procedure when the internet wasn't around. You put it on so late they can't get it on the national newscasts. And then by Monday, everybody's had their baseball games or barbecues and everybody's forgotten. And they might say, oh, wasn't there something about UFOs on Friday? Oh, yeah. Yeah, old news. So somebody in the government doesn't want to talk about this. And there's a reason for it, I believe. So I guess if that makes me a conspiracy theorist.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah.
So, I mean, why don't you relay at least a little bit about the weirdest school day ever? Because I find that story so flippin' fascinating.
Yeah, that is something. This was Ray, and he was in Ohio, kind of almost right near the West Virginia border. And he had a very kind of typical school for the time, nothing unusual. But this particular day, he went to school and he thought it was kind of weird because, in his words, they were just piddling around. They weren't really doing much. And they came on the PA system and said every class is going to be directed grade by grade. And he thought that was very, very odd because they hadn't been told anything about this. So I think he was in 5th grade. So they kept calling grade by grade, and they finally came to him. And they went into this room in the cafeteria, which was odd because they would be setting it up for lunch because it was one of those, they used it as a double space. I think they used it like a gym and a cafeteria, if you remember that, and the old tables would go and so on. But they had these people in white coats, and Ray said he thinks they had sunglasses on. He can't remember, but that's what he recalls. And they were asking these kids all these demographic questions. Where are you from? You know, all these questions about their lives and about them. And then they would have them go outside. And Ray thought this was really weird because back in the day, you know, I'm old enough to remember when you had your school clothes and you had your after school play clothes, and never the twain shall meet. You know, you, God forbid you go out and play in your school clothes. You're in big trouble. So anyway, usually they'd say, hey, we're going to have field activities outside, dress your children appropriately. No note like that. But they went and they took him through all these physical tests, him and all the kids. He said they were doing flips. They were running, doing all these different things, and they were like physical tests. And he ran across this one woman, and he said, how are we doing on the tests? And she kind of smiled, and she said, tests? Wait 1 minute. And they brought out this other guy, and they took Ray into another tent. Off the top of my head, they had him do all these different kinds of mental tests. And then it came down, I think they even brought him to another place, and this was a closed place. And they said, now we're going to take your blood. And Ray thought, I don't really want him to take my blood. But then he thought about it a little bit more and realized he was the kind of kid who actually thought dental drills were kind of cool. So he said, go ahead and take my blood. So anyway, he thought he killed it on the test. He thought he did great. But they ended up dismissing them back to their homerooms and everything. And it was just, they all went home, and it was a very quiet ride back home. And he didn't tell his parents anything because he followed the instructions of the people at the school back in the day. You know, you did what you were told. He kept quiet, didn't say anything. Went back the next day, and he's in his class with his homeroom teacher ever, and says, "Hey, how'd we do on those tests?" And his teacher said, "What test are you talking about, Ray?" And he said, "You know, they were having us do those flips and doing those mental tests and all that stuff. How'd we do?" She's like, "There weren't any tests yesterday. Yesterday was like any other day." And even his classmates had no idea what he was talking about. So that was the story of the strangest school day ever. But there's one little thing that kind of gets to what David was talking about. He knows it's real, wasn't his imagination, because remember they took his blood? Mm-hmm. He still has a scar there to this very day, or at least when he told the story. So that's the story of the strangest school day ever.
So what's your take on that, Jim? What do you think?
I think there's a couple possibilities. One is more paranormal spooky than the other. They're both sinister. One's more paranormal spooky. One, it could have been some kind of mass abduction from aliens that like hypnotized everybody, but Ray was not as hypnotizable and he remembered. That's one, because he did say it seemed like they had sunglasses on and it seemed very, very bright, he said.
Yeah, like the sun was extremely bright, like brighter than the sun should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the other so that's kind of the paranormal type explanation. Some kind of mass UFO abduction. They were testing the children. Ray was somehow able to understand what was going on and went through it. The other possibility is just as sinister, I guess, but more terrestrial, that maybe it was some kind of government test or something, that maybe these kids were drugged, possibly, and that maybe Ray was less susceptible to the effects of that. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's why they wanted his blood. Maybe they wanted to know why, because he could remember it. He probably performed better on the tests, maybe, than the other kids. So maybe they wanted to see what made him tick and what made him resistant to whatever this drug was. Those were the two theories I had. What about you guys?
I'm going to go with number one. I think
really?
I think that the thing that leads me to the mass UFO type of abduction thing is the fact that his words of how when they walked outside, the sun was so bright that it seemed that it was abnormally brighter than what he ever remembers the sun being. And to me, and maybe not in every story, but in 95+% of abduction stories, it's that white, intense, unbelievably bright light that appears. You know, whether it's engulfing your house, whether it's coming down as a spotlight beam directly on you. You know, I have not seen the white projectile beam, but I have seen 2 UFOs in my lifetime. And the one that I saw up in northern Minnesota had this most incredible blue. It would almost be like the blue, what you see now in the Eagle Eye headlights, like the Eagle Eye Vision headlights that you see on the road that are so bright blue that they annoy the hell out of you at night. Right? Except for the fact this was 1982 or 83 that I saw this. And there was no such thing as Eagle Eye headlights. And there certainly was no vehicles, or there would have had to been 10 vehicles 25 feet off the ground over an island in the middle of Lake Kaptogama. Mm-hmm. And the likelihood of that is probably slim and none. Right. So I think that he somehow, like you said, Jim, I think he somehow is immune to whatever the aliens were doing to everybody else in a mind control type of way. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't as affected. And they were extremely interested to find out why he was not affected, along with the group of the other couple of kids that were in that.
There were a couple of other kids in that category. Correct.
A couple other kids. Nobody was talking. They were sitting in the chairs. So I would assume those other kids that were in that closed tent with him also had their blood drawn.
Yeah.
Probably not as affected as the rest of the group was in mass. So I think that that's a logical deduction from that and how my view of the world is.
Michael is smiling.
Yeah, well, that's because Mike knows that I have weird tangents.
No, I'm always.
He's known me for a long time.
Chances are just because of my own thoughts and my answer. So, I mean, honestly, I can see both sides. It could be either or it could be a combination of both. It could be, some sort of aliens or whatever masquerading obviously as humans that are working with our government for what reason? I mean, who knows? But I mean, I have a friend of the show with Dave and myself, and her name's Sina, and she's psychic medium and stuff like that, and she's always trying to drill into my head that what people see in movies is the truth. Like that, not all movies, obviously, but so I mean, like I go back to like the Adjustment Bureau, these weird government facilities who can change, how you perceive. I actually never saw it. I really need to see it. It's right on my alley. But and also like the Bourne series where they talk about how they were training and whatnot, and because of what they had been through, they have the sensitivity to light, and that reads with the whole, all of a sudden whatever they're going through, they have this big sensitivity to light. But again, Dave's right. I mean, maybe they all took him into a giant holodeck and they couldn't get the light right in order to test
right.
What's going on.
Could be screen memories. That may not been what they experienced, but it was put to them in such a way that they could comprehend it and deal with it.
Right.
But I mean, I absolutely believe that the reason that he was selected to have his blood drawn was, as Dave said, a way to figure out there's something in his genetics that makes him immune, or at least very less susceptible to what they are trying to do.
Right. And the thing is I like to think, again, I've said this before, I'm a patriotic American. I have my flag out for Flag Day, in fact. But I do think that, it's been well noted that our government has done immoral experimentation on people, including experiments with LSD on soldiers. I mean, it's happened. This is not a conspiracy theory. This has definitely happened. And I would like to think we don't do those kind of things anymore, but who knows?
Agreed.
I would like to agree with you that I would like to think that we don't do stuff like that anymore. I think it's very highly unlikely that. I think they're just a lot more done in the underground cities, let's say in Utah or Taos, New Mexico, or under Mount Shasta. And so those are just they're taken to a place where it isn't going to leak out, or Area 52 or Area 51, right? I mean, it just depends.
I just want to ask one quick, I know I'm not supposed to do this, but I want to ask one question. What do you guys think about this crypto-terrestrial thing that's just recently come out? Some Harvard researchers have said, hey, this is something we need to look at, that maybe the non-human intelligences aren't necessarily from out there, but maybe they're from here, whether they're underground, undersea. And I know this is not a new thing because Mac Tanis did work on this, and other people have ultra-terrestrials, the idea that they are here and they're not necessarily from out there, or maybe they're both. What do you guys think about that? Do you have any strong thoughts on that?
I think that we've explored 5 to 8% of the ocean. I think that leaves a whole lot of real estate for something that wants to hide to be able to hide very easily.
Mm-hmm.
I think that strategically that there are places that we're never going to see in mankind's and humankind's life before we blow ourselves up, right? We're never going to get that far in exploration to like find this stuff. I think there's a distinct possibility that there's an intelligence that lives undersea that has some sort of base under the ocean.
Well, think about it. I mean, even trying to go to the Titanic, we saw what happened with that expedition last year. Yeah. where it just imploded. I mean, and even that's like a known site, right?
Right.
So, I mean, you're right. I mean, I've heard people say we know less about the deep ocean than we do about space. So, yeah, and that's why you have these transmedium craft that seem to be able to go from the ocean to the sky very easily.
Right.
So, I think it makes some sense. I'm not saying, yeah, absolutely, but I think it's certainly something worth thinking about.
Before I give my answer to that, I want to ask one quick question in return. Why are you not supposed to ask this question?
Because you're the hosts.
Oh,
this is an open forum, Jim.
This is a discussion, Jim. You ask us anything that you want.
Anything
but
you want. Yeah.
For a second there, you're just like, I know I'm not supposed to. I'm like,
I'm not
why?
To, well,
yeah, I'm like,
guys in the black vans.
The listeners
what's going on?
The handlers are listening. I'm sure they are, but
yeah, I'm sure they are too.
But I figure at this point I've done between 20, depending on if you count out everything I've done between 2,500 to 3,000 episodes. I think they know what I think by this point.
I would think so.
Yeah, Dave and I often joke about whatever conspiracy theory topic we're going to hit that night or whatever, that the vans are going to show up.
The vans going to show up in the front, and we're going to end up in some underground facility. Yeah.
Yep. So I definitely think that it's probably been here for, like the crypto terrestrials. I think they're honestly been part of society for a long time. I think they're getting better at what they do. Like they're evolving just the same as us. And as we've evolved and we get new technologies and stuff like that, they're evolving as well to blend in more and more.
Mm-hmm.
What their intent is, because I think there's definitely people on both sides. They're the terrestrials who are trying to help us, and I think there's terrestrials who are trying to stop us from doing whatever it is they're trying to stop us from doing. I don't know what the ratio is to that. I think that they're here. I think that they're doing something to us, for us, with us, and however much we're going to know, I think it's going to depend on how much they want us to know.
Yeah, I often think whether you're talking about the crypto terrestrials or whether you're talking about ET from out there, I mean, in a way, if they wanted to destroy us, wouldn't we already be destroyed? But they might be playing the long game too. To them, maybe 100 years is like a blink of an eye. And I think if they do exist, to me, it sounds kind of like what you said. I think there's probably, just like humanity, I think there's some good ones that probably would like to help us, and there's some ones that don't care. Maybe one of the most frightening scenarios is that they just don't care one way or the other. We're like lab rats to them. Now that's truly frightening, because if that's the case, they'll tolerate us until we're inconvenient, and then they'll squash us like, a construction crew would squash an anthill building a highway. So who knows? I just think there is something. It's the old smoke and fire thing. Yes, there are hoaxes. Absolutely. There are people who see the planet Venus and think it's aliens. Yes, that's true. But there's too many reports of too many people pilots and people who know the sky and people of goodwill, that I believe there's something there. One of my favorites was, and this wasn't on my shows, but years ago I saw this news report on one of the cable channels. They interviewed a gentleman who had been a pilot for President Obama when Obama was running for his first term, before he was president. But you got to know that guy was probably vetted and investigated and checked out to the nth degree before he could fly a major presidential candidate.
Right, absolutely.
And he told this amazing story very early in his career, when he was either a co-pilot or navigator or something on a plane, and he saw this tremendous UFO. I don't remember, but it wasn't just a little blip. It was like this huge thing. And basically, he was told by the older pilots and things, just keep it quiet, just keep it on the down low, And again, this guy came out and told his story, and nothing to gain, probably have more to lose, you know? I don't think it's all being made up. I think there's something there. And I love to see, usually I can't stand Congress, but I love to see people from both sides of the aisle, whether you're talking about Moskowitz, Burchett, Rubio, Gillibrand, all, Republicans and Democrats agree on virtually nothing now. And to see those people from different sides of the aisle saying, yeah, we need to get more information out there. That's very encouraging. I hope that they get enough buy-in to make that happen.
I think that the lab rat thing is an interesting concept, because the only time that I think that we're just being observed, right? So I think honestly, might sound harsh to say kind of the lab rat thing, but I think that the species is more advanced than we are. They're just observing us. And the only time they ever really seem to come to the forefront and get involved is when nuclear technology is involved. And people can jump right on the conspiracy bandwagon and whatever. Okay. But if you take a look through history and some of the stories that have been reported and some of the incidences that come from top generals that are retired, that are talking when they couldn't talk while they were actively serving and stuff, and just general enlisted individuals who were there and witnessed it too. The only time it seems like they really get involved is when it has to do with nuclear technology.
I have two quick things on that.
Sure.
One just general. I got to interview years ago Robert Salas, who was Air Force, and he was at Malmstrom Air Force Base, I believe, in 1967, when a series of ICBMs totally went offline, and at the same time they were having UFO sightings. That was fascinating. But more cogent to me personally was kind of a personal connection. So I was interviewing probably the author that's done the most on that. His name is Robert Hastings. He's written books about UFOs and nukes. Anyway, so I was interviewing him one day, and this is maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago maybe, and he's telling this story about this Air Force officer, and he was stationed, I think, in Big Sur, California, and there was this rocket test, and this was the early 1960s. This guy was in the Air Force, and what happened is that he was in charge of filming the test. So anyway, they've got all the cameras set up, and he's so many miles away watching it on a monitor or whatever. And they see the rocket go up, and something injects a beam into the rocket, like this side. It goes around and does it on this side, goes around, hits it on this side, and then it hits a bomb. The missile disintegrates. But I kind of gave you the punchline there. They didn't see it. They just did the test, and they thought it went fine. So they got back and they called him in. At this point, I kind of screwed up the story. At this point, he thought it was fine, this officer. And his commanding officer brought him in and said, "What the hell were you guys doing? What was going on?" He's like, we got the film. Everything's good. He's like, "Watch this." And he shows him the film, and that's where the disintegration business happens. And his commanding officer, and again, I'm paraphrasing because I know if the person that told the story originally, if I get a couple things wrong, I apologize in advance. But basically his commanding officer said, "I don't know what happened, but you did not see this. You never saw this, and you're never to speak of it again. You understand me?" He said, "Yes." Well, in the middle of Hastings telling me this story, I'm like, I know this story. It turns out that the person he was talking about was Dr. Robert Jacobs. Bob Jacobs was a film officer in the Air Force in the early 60s, and he ended up becoming communications professor, got his PhD, did a lot of cool stuff, wrote for TV shows, all this stuff. And he happened to be my broadcasting professor in the early 1990s. And he told the exact same story to our class and filmed and videoed it. And I was there. And he told exactly the same story. And then I found out a little more. He went on Larry King and told the story. And look for this: Robert Jacobs, Larry King, and he was on there with Bill Nye, the science guy. And Bill Nye was playing the skeptic, and Bob told his story. And Bill Nye started to shoot it down and say, this and extraordinary evidence, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And my professor, Dr. Jacobs, he's something else. He's not one to be toyed with. And he said, listen, pal. He said, if you're done with the vinegar and baking soda, I was there. I saw it. Who had that technology in 1962 or whatever it was? Right. It was the early 60s. He's like, the Russians didn't have it, the Chinese didn't have it, and we didn't have it. And he said, so don't tell me what this is paraphrasing, but he said, don't tell me what I saw. I saw what I saw, and I saw a UFO shoot down that missile. And I believe his commanding officer even eventually years later wrote a letter saying that everything Bob said is true. And I totally believe him 110%. And to get the right story, to get it told right, rather than that kind of crappy version I did, look up Bob Jacobs or Robert Jacobs and Larry King, and maybe throw in Bill Nye too on YouTube. It'll be worth the watch for those of us who, have a strong feeling about these things, because it was really just very cool. And it's the same story he told in the early 90s. It's never changed.
One of the things that Dave and I did like a 5-part episode on this, or episodes, I should say. But there's a book that we read called The Secret War. I don't know if I've
heard of it.
You've heard of it. Okay. But in it talks about our advancements into space and how we're not ready for that yet. And so, this is just part of it, but it talked about how they won't really interfere with anything that we do unless we try to do something we're not ready for. Mm-hmm. And they will, these aliens, whatever you want to call them, will not shoot them down so much as sabotage. They'll make sure that we don't get to do it. And, when we were reading this book, at least for me, I was like, yeah, that's a lot to take in.
Right.
And it just so happened that afterwards, Dave and I both started seeing like news reports and newspaper articles and stuff like that about things went wrong with this and things went wrong with that. And we're like, holy crap. Like, we're actually seeing this in real life. This is just not some book somebody published. This is the Times, this is Washington Post. It's on MSNBC, it's on CNN. And recently, like 2-3 years ago, like we launched like a $5 billion satellite or something like that. And it got halfway up and some $5 O-ring or something malfunctioned and it all got scrapped. And we're like, yeah, that sounds familiar. So, there's definitely something going on where we're, as Dave said, we're being observed, and not only observed, but we're kind of being contained. And again, for what purpose, I don't know, but like it's noticeable if you know what you're looking for.
Right. It's one of those things. It's kind of like the whole moon thing. First of all, I want to go on record 100%. I believe we went to the moon. So I don't want any question about that. But we've not been to the dark side of the moon, right? Also, also the other thing is that we've not been back. Now I know Artemis is supposed to remedy that, and I hope that it does. I just always thought it was funny we never went back. Was there some reason we didn't know? Maybe they saw something on the moon. Some people have theorized that the astronauts saw other craft on the moon, and they weren't the Russians or the Soviets. Right. I'm not saying that's true or not. I did interview the guy the guy that actually Buzz Aldrin punched, Bart Sibrel, who said that we didn't go to the moon, but I fully believe that we went to the moon. Actually, we were on family vacation just a couple of weeks ago, and one of our stops was the Kennedy Space Center. It was tremendous and made me very proud, and I think it's awesome. But I always wonder if there's another reason why we didn't go back to the moon. It's kind of weird because it's been, gosh, what was the last moon landing? 72 or something like that.
Yeah, I was going to say early 70s, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just kind of weird. We just decided, no, we've been there. We're not going to go back. You would think by now we'd have a full-blown colony there.
Well, I mean, what's your take on the conspiracy theories that the moon isn't exactly a moon?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And it's funny because I had heard that years ago, and I'm kind of like, come on, well, guys.
I mean,
but it's come up again, and I'm like, well, maybe I was too hasty. I don't know.
I mean, it's scientific. Like, there's scientists out there like have no idea how the moon even got there. Like, it's not. Where am I looking for? It's like origin isn't circling the Earth. Like, nobody knows where the moon came from.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I find it interesting. I'm not even going to talk about any sort of theories on that. I just want to know what your opinion on that broad theory.
I think the moon is naturally occurring, but I've done enough of these shows to be just a little bit paranoid.
You know what the most beautiful part of an observation situation like that would be? Is to just clearly hide in plain sight.
Mm-hmm.
We walk outside every night and see this gigantic sphere in the sky. On a really good night, you can actually see the craters with your bare eyes.
Yeah.
Right? And what if that is just the most perfect observation point for an intelligent species to be somehow inside that sphere and have their own world inside that sphere, and then using that as a observation base station? And maybe that's why we weren't going back, because we were communicated with and said, hey, you made it here. Congratulations.
Never come back.
But we don't want you to be a regular visitor. You're not quite ready for it yet. Right?
Well, the thing is, I mean, that would be the ultimate Trojan horse, right?
Right.
I mean, if you think about it. And it's, I mean, what is it, 3 days to travel there?
Yeah.
With our technology in the late 60s.
Right.
So, yeah, that's a wild thought. And that's the thing. I mean, that's part of the reason I enjoy doing these shows and talking about these things, is because you can have a lot of thought experiments, and not that any one of them is necessarily correct, but I think it really broadens your mind. And people say, oh, you believe in nonsense. And it's like, look, I'm a big admirer of science. What we're doing right now, I'm old enough to remember when you had to be Ted Koppel and have a satellite to do, okay? With Nightline, if you remember that show back in the day. So Jim, that's because of science. So what'd you say?
You're not the oldest guy on the show. I got you beat.
Oh, okay. I got you. I'm used to being the oldest these days. I used to be the youngest. Now I'm always the oldest.
Yeah, no, my high tech high school class was typing 101 because there weren't computers yet. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, I was right behind you. I wasn't too far behind. So anyway, the point being that, we've made tremendous strides, and science deserves all the credit in the world, and I think it's great. Although I have my theories if we might have had some help the way that things accelerated post-war. But the point being, I'm a great admirer of science, but at any point in the history of science, if you look, there was probably a certain amount of smugness, like, oh, we've got it all figured out. Everybody knows that there's the ether. So to me, a lot of this is like DNA, right? We didn't know DNA existed back in the day, and then it was discovered, then sequenced and figured out. Didn't mean it didn't exist. We just didn't know about ghosts. There could be a quote scientific explanation, but it might be like ultraviolet light. We can't see it. And maybe we don't have the instruments and the techniques to figure out. Maybe we will in 3 or 4 centuries, if, to David's point, we don't blow ourselves up. So I guess what I'm saying is that I think you can respect science, you can believe in science, but also have an appreciation that I believe science has blind spots. And sometimes science is like a religion. And people are just saying, well, it can't be because it can't be. And science doesn't know everything. Although, again, science knows a lot, and I give it a lot of credit and enjoy its benefits every day of my life, and appreciative for that. But it's not infallible.
Agreed.
I always just say the paranormal is just science that hasn't been proven yet. That's all it is. I mean, if you would go back 30 years and start talking about cell phones, people would probably burn you at the stake as a witch. I mean, because what are you talking about? That's insanity. Like, get out of here with that sort of. We're never going to be able to do that. And now it's in every home and pocket of every, from people 5 years and up.
I remember in the early 90s being told that high definition television by a TV engineer wouldn't happen. It was just too difficult to do.
Yeah.
Now we're 4K, 8K.
When I was in high school, if you would have told anybody I knew that someday you're going to hold this little thing in your hand about the size of a deck of cards, and you could talk to somebody face to face that's in Australia, I would have looked at you like you were insane.
Yeah, this is
I have an open mind because of all the stuff that I've experienced in my life, and I still would have told you that you're insane.
Right. No, it's absolutely amazing, and there's more to come. We've got AI, and it's a big old double-edged sword. With AI, I have an open mind. I mean, the other day I was researching a thing for my business, was doing the traditional Googling and stuff, couldn't find a thing, used AI, asked it a question about it, and it popped up with great information. I went back and verified it because I think that's always important to make sure it's not a hallucination. And it was spot on. It was perfect. And that's where it can be helpful. Now, where it goes beyond that, though, who knows? Does it become smarter than us? Does it become the master? I think the jury's still out. I think it's kind of scary in a way, but I kind of ride both sides of the fence. But a lot of interesting stuff to come down the pike to come for sure.
The Terminator. That's all I'm going to say. Skynet. I know Mike shakes his head because I talk about it all the time, but that's where we're headed. Anyway,
it's one of the possibilities. I definitely believe it.
Yeah, I do too. Let's move on to Mike had some couple of points that he had brought up that we wanted to get to.
I see we had these other topics and we have 20 minutes left.
Yeah, we get 20 minutes left, so
we haven't touched a single one of them.
No, right.
So I think the first one that should definitely be talked about, since we're talking about your stories and believability and stuff like that. And the reason why I think, the reason that we need to learn how to be more open-minded is mostly because, and this is my question to you, is there's so many people who want to use the paranormal to get rich, to get popular. They're creating their own videos, they're creating their own stories, they're making stuff up in order to get popular and to get attention on themselves. In your experience, since you have done probably thousands of these by now, is what's something to look for between somebody who is being sincere and they have had an experience and they have a story that they want to tell, and it's all truth, and people who are just trying to make something up in order to get attention on themselves?
I think that's really tough to suss out. One thing I would say is my favorite stories are stories from people who say, nothing ever happens to me, but there was this one time. And then they tell you the most mind-blowing stories. Those are my favorites. Now, I do believe some people are more sensitive and they do pick up on more things. And I think they can still be legitimate. And then I think there's another category of people who say, well, I have tea with the aliens every third Thursday of the month. And there I start to get lost a little bit. So I think, I think it's like I hate to say this is a uber cop-out, but I think that most of us kind of have BS detectors. And I think you have to use that when you're listening to stories. I think the vast majority of people who come on my show, and I think because it's like self-selecting, I think are being straight with me and are telling me what they believe really happened. There may be some people who are, maybe it's a loved one or something, and they're hoping that it's a communication, and maybe I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe not. I'll never say that, but because I want to be, and who am I to say? Maybe it is. So I think sometimes people can fool themselves into thinking something's paranormal that maybe isn't. But again, I try to default on believing people, kind of what David said. But I think, if it becomes that, constant demon story over and over and over, sometimes I get a little more skeptical. And again, to me, and this kind of going back to what we started with, it's not all demons. It's a whole array of range of experiences, and the darker energies are part of that, but it's not the whole thing. But that is I think the quickest way to get popular. I said this on a podcast earlier today I was on. I think if I leaned into that more and did the whole, I'm in a dark shirt now, and everything's evil, and because I'll tell you, we had a show last week for Campfire, and the title of it, what I usually do is take one story and I make that the title of the show. This one's called The Evil Eye, and it's a story about the evil eye, which is, there's one in the book actually, and it's fascinating to me, and I kind of believe in it. I think that's a thing. I think people can put curses on you. And then the previous week, the stories were pet stories of love from beyond, because we had some great heartwarming pet stories, because I'm a big pet fan. But the thing is that I knew when I put that out and put that title on it, that the downloads, at least initially, would be like 15% less, because it wasn't attacked by a demon in my home, Right. So I think that people lean into that side of it because they see that as more marketable. And I've kind of said, you know what, I'm going to try to be more authentic. And I'm going to take the stories they come. And if somebody comes with a demon story or an evil entity story, I'm going to present that and talk about that. And if someone comes to me with a story where grandma came to say hi after she passed, I'm going to share that too. I'm not going to hold that back because it's not as marketable. And it's just the way I've decided to do it.
I think that's a great way to do it.
Yeah, I just present what the people present to me.
Story. If you ever need a great feel-good pet story, I have a phenomenal ghost story about a feel-good pet story.
Love them. Love to hear.
I have a phenomenal story about a feel-good pet story. Gotcha.
Oh, it is. It's the story about Shadow.
I do.
Yeah. I mean, it's just all 5 members of my family saw, regretfully, I found him in the road, and he had been taken instantaneously because the car that hit him ran right over his head. Not to be graphic, but
way to say that after being graphic, Dave.
Well, I didn't describe it. I'm just saying, right? So when I found him, his body was perfectly fine, but he had been hit in the head, is what happened, right? And so by a car. So I thoroughly believe that instantaneous death of anything, you don't know that you're dead. My cat showed back up at my house for a week and spent time with all 5 of us.
Wow.
All 5 of my 3 daughters, my ex-wife, and I all spent time with him for a week after I found him and buried him.
I believe it's possible. I do believe that first of all, I believe pets have souls, and I think they can visit us. I think that kind of thing does happen. I think it's real, and I've had a lot of calls about that over the years. But that's a pretty remarkable one.
It was pretty crazy, and I knew that he wasn't really him, but he was bouncing around the house, and I'm like, it's fine. You're welcome to be here, buddy. It's good to see you. I'm glad you're in a good mood, and I'm glad that you're playful like you always were. And and then it was just gone. He was just gone. He just moved on, transitioned to wherever. So it was cool though.
Jim, what do you attribute to people's need to badmouth and ridicule people who want to come forward and just tell a story of something that happened to them? Because it's been going on since, I've been in the paranormal as full-time and invested for 13 years.
Right.
And one of my first memories after my first thing was being at an outdoor fair with the team that I was on, which Dave was a part of, and some guy came over, looked at our sign or whatever, laughed at us and said, "Let me know when you find Elvis," and walked away. I mean, there was no reason for him to do it, but he felt the need to. And it's worse now than it ever was back then. Why do you think that happens?
Well, first and foremost, I think just some people are jerks. I'd use another word, but we're live, so I won't do that. So I think that's, somebody's got to say something about everything, to some extent. There's people like that. But I think sometimes it might be insecurity, like a discomfort with the subject, a discomfort with something like the topic of death, because people will ask me, well, what's your favorite topic in all this? And I say the afterlife, because we're not all going to see a Bigfoot. We're not all going to see a UFO. We might not all see a ghost, but we're all going to die, at least physically. So that's truly the universal subject. But my point being that I think people are uncomfortable with the themes. I don't know if it's gotten, well, maybe you might have a better perspective on that than me. I don't know if it's gotten worse, but I think in some ways, people are more accepting of ghost stories, for example, than UFO stories, I think. It's a weird continuum. I think a ghost story these days, more people would be bound to say, yeah, maybe it's because of the TV shows, I don't know. More accepting than maybe if somebody said they saw Bigfoot or saw a UFO. I don't know why that is, but I think that might be the case. But I just think that a lot of it's, even with the hardcore skeptics, I think kind of like some of them are totally convinced this is all BS. Okay, there are people like that. But I think there's just as many, maybe because of, I think sometimes that kind of reaction can come out if somebody was brought up in like an overly religious background, or, with a lot of dogma, or maybe it was very strict or something, and they kind of go to the other side. They're like, I'm an avowed atheist and I don't believe in any of this. I think sometimes that's a reaction to it. And not only not believing in God, but not believing in other realms and the supernatural and things. So I guess what I'm saying is sometimes I think it's that, but a lot of times I think what's at the root of it is kind of like a thought of like, what if I'm not right about everything? What if there is a supernatural? What if you can't weigh everything on a scale or measure it in a test tube? What if I'm wrong? It can't be right. It can't be right. It's got to be wrong. It's like anybody when you challenge their belief system. Frankly, if you challenge the belief system of somebody like me who believes in this stuff, I might get defensive. So I think there's some of all of that wrapped up into it.
I still don't think that it's right.
No, I don't think it's right.
Well, no, right. I mean, my 2 cents on it is that, like I said at the beginning of the show, right? I believe everybody until I have a reason not to believe them. So I listen to everything everybody has to say and take it as it's presented, and maybe to a fault, actually, at times. But I don't feel that I'm there to judge them.
That's right. Who am I to judge what they did see and they didn't see?
Right, exactly.
I feel exactly the same way. I mean, you get feelings in certain stories. I mean, I think it's human nature that certain stories impact you more. I know, Michael, like you said, the paranormal polka one, that one really hit you. I mean, I think certain stories or certain accounts are going to touch you in a different way. Either they're going to frighten you or they're going to pull at the heartstrings or whatever it might be in a different way. But on the whole, I tend to believe my people a lot more than I don't believe them.
Yeah.
And really, I think it's been, I said this a couple of times, so I'm repeating myself, but kind of self-selecting. I think overall, the people that come on my show, for whatever reason, seem to like me, and they don't want to like make stuff up. They want to say, Jim, this happened to me. I think it might be paranormal. And I take that at face value 99 times out of 100.
I like the fact that you use my 99% rule.
There you go.
I never say 100%.
Oh, Lord.
In 7 years, I think I've said it 5 times, retracted it instantly twice. And the other 3 I let slide just because I felt that strongly about the topic we were talking about. In 7
there you
years,
go. There you go.
So,
yeah, he's got to be
99% of the time.
He's got to be very careful, because anytime he says something like, I guarantee, I'm like, That's 100%.
Off, and he's like, no, don't. That's 100%. And I'm like, you're right. I'm going to say 99 and 5/8. I'm invested in this. Like, I think that this is legitimate.
So dumb, but
I think
whatever.
And getting back on UFOs quick, I think some of the most amazing footage that I've ever seen about UFOs comes from the astronauts. Like when the guys are in the space station or they're in the space shuttle and they're filming the Earth, and all of a sudden you see something that you totally could not explain moving across the sky in an intelligent fashion, not in a looped gravitational pull type of fashion. I think that's amazing stuff.
There's a lot of thought that there were communications that were not shared with the general, radio communications that weren't shared with the general public, and things that were saw. If you look at somebody like Edgar Mitchell, who was in the Apollo missions, he definitely believed in the existence of ET and so forth. And I think there were some things in those Apollo missions they saw that they definitely did not communicate with us. I kind of believe that. So if that, again, makes me a conspiracy theorist, I guess I am one.
It'd be interesting to see when they like lost communication to Earth, as they were there on the planet, if they didn't open communication to something else during that time frame. Right. And have these amazing personal experiences. And then all of a sudden now we're back, where we can, like, our signal can reach you again. And hey, Apollo, this is
right. Yeah, everything's cool.
How's it going? And they're like, oh,
play golf on the moon.
Yeah. Nope, I agree.
Okay, so I have a quick question, and then I'm going to ask probably the question is just going to end the show.
Okay.
So because you were part of communications and you went to school for it and you worked for, obviously a huge broadcasting company, and even now, as you're doing it, have you ever come across any communication that you found sketchy or weird? Maybe you didn't know where it was coming from. And if you can't talk about it, wink, wink, you can say that too.
Not anything that I can think of off the top of my head. I did hear something weird one time about reporters, or a reporter being influenced maybe by the government on a low level. But or I don't know if it was, well, I can't get into it exactly, but there was something that seemed kind of sketchy to me that happened years ago, decades ago, supposedly, what I was told. But that was just a kind of little anecdote. Now, I can't think of anything in particular. I've gotten some kind of out there communications. Probably the most out there was kind of comical. Was somebody got my phone number one time, and my daughter, I think, was in high school or something, maybe junior high, and we were out somewhere. And so I got a voicemail, and I played it on through the car system. And I'll kind of quote what it said in the voice that it said. It said, "We're out here and Bigfoot is mining uranium."
Wow.
And I don't know who that was or what that was all about, or if that was a joke. I don't know. It was not a phone number I recognized that I could figure out who it was. Never answered it, by the way. But we're out here and Bigfoot's mining uranium.
That's hilarious.
So maybe that was somebody trying to tell me something, but nothing in connection with the shows. I mean, I've gotten some kind of odd, and you occasionally will get an email from someone who's obviously disturbed or something. But overall, it's nothing too sinister.
Gotcha. I was just curious. I mean, because since you deal with radio frequencies and stuff like that, maybe you ever came across something. Okay, so this is probably going to be the last question of the show, because it's probably not even something you can answer in like 5 minutes. But one of the topics that we wanted to get to was kind of like how the paranormal, and it's done it for me over the last couple of years, especially, where the paranormal kind of widens your perspective on the universe and what it can do. So I mean, in your own journey, from where you started from, as a little kid to now, what are some of the I guess eye-opening moments that you have come across that has completely changed the way you look at our world and our I guess you could say our dimension and our plane of existence?
Well, it's actually kind of interesting that you asked that. I interviewed a gentleman by the name of Jim Willis multiple times on my show, most recently last month. And ironically enough, we did a show about near-death experiences. And unfortunately, he just passed a couple of weeks ago. And it was so sad. But I went over to his Facebook page to see if there was any obituary and stuff. And he has a quote in his header he put there. And I don't know if I get the quote exactly right. But basically, the idea is not only the universe stranger than we imagine, it is stranger than we can imagine. And I think that's kind of the take-home message. People say, well, what have you learned? I haven't learned a lot, in the sense that I've learned a lot, but I have very few answers. In that, I started this, I thought, oh, I'll do this 6 months and I'll have all the answers. I'll talk to all these smart people. Not so much. But I'm more convinced there's stuff going on. And I am much more convinced that our universe is so much more complex and mysterious than we have any concept of. And even people like us who talk about the various possibilities, we might not even be close. But there is still much, much more that exists than we can put a handle on. And this world is so complex, and we're looking at like a 2D expression of like a 72D reality. You know what I'm saying? It goes back to the allegory of cave with Plato and all of that. So I think that's kind of how it's changed my view. I mean, I'll take something like retrocausality. Are you familiar with retrocausality? That's the idea something you do today can impact your past. And and I'll give you an example. When I worked in radio, and this goes back to the 90s, I was interested in every aspect of every job at the radio station. Really was no reason for me to be. I was in my 20s. My job was to schlep ads. Really, I had no reason to know why the traffic director who did the commercials, how she did her job, how the production director did his job, the businessman. But I wanted to know the details of everybody. It's almost like, someday I might own my own radio station. Well, that's very expensive. I was never going to own my own radio station, but then they invented something called podcasting. And today, I essentially, with 16 episodes a month, I kind of run a small radio station, and I do all those jobs. Somehow there was some co-communication between Jim from 1995 to Jim of 2024 saying, you're going to need how to know this. You're going to have to need to know this, and this job, and this job, and this job. And when people say, well, things are meant to be, it was like I was guided to my spouse or, to something that happened. It was meant to be. Is that actually maybe retrocausality? And you're having some kind of subconscious or psychic communication with future and past versions of yourself. And that's one small example of something that will totally blow your mind if you think about it enough. And there's so many topics like that. So that's why I think you asked me if you ever get run out of topics. Well, that's why I don't run out of topics, because you could think about this stuff every waking hour of every day and still not run out of stuff to think about.
Agreed.
We kind of have that issue every time we have a guest on, no matter how short we keep it or however long they're on, we never get to everything that we want to talk to them about.
Mm-hmm.
And
It happened again.
And it happened again.
There you go.
Jim, I know you wanted to come on and talk about your book, but I definitely hope that you will come back as just a paranormal discussion.
I'd love to.
Tons of topics or whatever, and just shoot the breeze with our fellow paranormal person.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I hope everybody does get to check out the book, True Ghost Stories, number 6, volume 6. But you can read the books in any order. And then mainly, I would just guide people to my free podcast, Jim Harold's Campfire and the Paranormal Podcast. You can find those Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. And Michael and David, I appreciate it. David's playing hurt here with the headache. Hope I didn't make it worse.
Oh,
And I thank you both for getting to spend some time with you and your great audience.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. Can't wait till you come back on. So, all right. Well, that does it for us. We'll be back with another new episode next week. Everybody stay healthy, stay safe. We want to see you back here. Have a great night.